He had always believed his life was steady, predictable, and safe. From the outside, it looked like everything was in place: a respectable marriage, a home that carried laughter on the surface, and a routine that never wavered. But beneath the calm exterior, there was a growing silence that kept widening between him and the woman he once thought he would never drift away from. Their conversations had lost the warmth they used to carry, and instead of sharing secrets and dreams, their words became little more than instructions and reminders. Mornings were about schedules, evenings about responsibilities, and nights about exhaustion. Somewhere along the way, the spark had disappeared, leaving behind comfort without passion, presence without intimacy. He noticed it most in the small details. The way her eyes rarely lingered on him anymore. The way touches felt absent, reduced to necessity instead of desire. The way they could sit side by side, yet feel miles apart. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't conflict, it was worse than that. It was indifference, a quiet distance that seemed impossible to bridge. He told himself it was normal, that every long-term relationship went through phases like this. But late at night, lying awake while she slept peacefully, he couldn't silence the ache gnawing inside him. Then there was her. Not in the way people imagine, not at first. She was someone who had always been around, a familiar face in familiar spaces, yet suddenly she felt different. He caught himself noticing things he shouldn't: her laugh that seemed unforced, her words that carried an attention he had been missing, her way of making even ordinary moments feel alive. He brushed it off as coincidence, convinced himself it was nothing. But when he caught her gaze longer than he should have, when the air between them carried an unspoken charge, he felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about beauty. It was about recognition. She noticed him. She asked questions he didn't realize he longed to answer. She listened, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. Every small interaction became magnified in his mind, leaving echoes that followed him long after the moment had passed. He tried to push it away, tried to remind himself of his commitments, his vows, his reality. But the contrast between what he had at home and what he felt in those fleeting moments grew sharper each day. The conflict within him was relentless. He reminded himself that temptation was temporary, that feelings could mislead, that risking everything for something undefined was madness. And yet, he couldn't deny how alive it made him feel. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't dismissed. He was seen. That truth lingered dangerously in his chest, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. Still, he told himself it was harmless. Just glances, just conversations, just stolen fragments of attention that meant nothing. But deep down, a part of him already knew that something had shifted, and that once the heart begins to wander, it rarely finds its way back unchanged. He tried to stay away, convincing himself that keeping things professional and light would put his thoughts back in order. But the pull grew stronger with every encounter. What started as occasional conversations turned into moments he began to look forward to. A simple hello carried warmth he no longer felt at home, and when she asked how he was, it sounded like she actually wanted to know. The attention was subtle, but it was enough to remind him of a version of himself he thought had faded. Around her, he wasn't just a husband weighed down by duties, he was a man who could still make someone smile, still be desired. Their connection developed in ways that felt innocent on the surface but dangerously charged beneath it. Texts exchanged under the guise of routine became longer, more personal. Work discussions shifted to late-night chats about life, frustrations, dreams. He began sharing things he hadn't voiced in years, words that had been locked away because no one seemed to care. She listened, encouraged, laughed in places where his wife only sighed. The difference was intoxicating. He noticed the changes in himself. He checked his phone more often, hoping to see her name. He caught himself rehearsing small jokes to make her laugh. He lingered after conversations, reluctant to let them end. It wasn't physical yet, but the emotional gravity was undeniable. And in some ways, that was more dangerous. He felt guilty at times, a pang of betrayal creeping in when his wife asked about his day and he carefully left things out. But guilt faded quickly, replaced by a rush of anticipation the moment he thought of her again. He told himself he had control, that he could keep it from going further. But control was slipping each time they crossed a new boundary. The first time their hands brushed by accident, a current shot through him that left him rattled for hours. The first time she leaned closer to whisper, he felt his pulse race in a way he hadn't in years. He caught himself watching her, memorizing details, wondering things he shouldn't. And each time he promised himself he would draw the line, he found a reason to push it just a little further. There was a moment he would never forget. They had both stayed late, conversation flowing as if time didn't exist. When it was finally time to leave, silence stretched in the air, heavy and thick with everything left unsaid. Their eyes lingered, neither daring to speak what both already knew. It was a moment suspended on the edge of something irreversible. He walked away that night, but he didn't leave unchanged. The justifications grew louder in his mind. He told himself he wasn't happy at home, that maybe he deserved this. He told himself that it wasn't fair to live a life half fulfilled, that he had earned the right to feel alive again. These were thoughts he once would have condemned, but now they became his defense, the reason he let himself drift further into her orbit. The truth was undeniable. The line between temptation and action was thinning. He felt it every time he was near her, every time he replayed their conversations in his head. It wasn't a question of if anymore, but when. And though he tried to fight it, deep down, he already knew he was heading toward a moment he wouldn't be able to take back. That night was never planned, yet everything seemed to conspire to make it happen. He told himself it would be like every other time they had lingered too long in each other's company, but the energy was different, heavier, impossible to ignore. What had been silent looks and half-finished words before now felt like a storm pressing against a fragile door. He could sense the boundary collapsing, and though guilt clawed at him, desire drowned it out. He felt it in the way she looked at him, hesitant but inviting, uncertain but unwilling to step back. They were too close, and every second stretched out like an eternity. He told himself to walk away, to hold on to the fragile line of loyalty, but his body betrayed him. The unspoken attraction that had been building for weeks erupted in one reckless moment. When he finally leaned in, when distance vanished, he realized there was no undoing what had begun. Their lips met with urgency, not gentle or careful, but desperate, as if both had been starving for something they could no longer deny. The kiss was charged with every glance they had exchanged, every word unsaid, every night spent imagining what it would feel like. His heart pounded, not just from excitement but from the terrifying knowledge that he was crossing into betrayal. Still, he couldn't stop. He had been holding back for too long, and in that instant, restraint no longer mattered. What followed was a blur of heat and surrender. Every touch carried the weight of forbidden passion, every movement a silent acknowledgement that they had chosen this path together. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, consumed by the rush of finally giving in. But underneath the intensity was a gnawing awareness that he was destroying something sacred, even as he reveled in the escape. The night became a collision of contradictions, desire intertwined with guilt, euphoria laced with fear. Their breaths were uneven, their words whispered and broken, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile bubble they had created. He tried not to think about the life waiting for him outside that room, the promises he had made, the trust he was violating. For those hours, he shut out everything but her, surrendering to the fire that had been smoldering for too long. When it was over, silence fell heavy between them. Reality seeped in through the cracks, and for the first time he allowed himself to face what he had done. He looked at her, searching for answers, but her eyes mirrored his own conflict, satisfaction tangled with regret. Neither spoke the truth aloud, but both understood it. Nothing would ever return to the way it was. He sat in the stillness, catching his breath, heart racing with more than just desire. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, relentless and suffocating. He had given in, and in doing so, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. That night had changed everything, not only in his marriage but in who he was. The man who walked into that room was not the same one who would walk out. Word count, 582. Shall I continue with section 4, the aftermath and consequences, in the same voice and word count? The morning after carried no trace of passion, only the heavy silence of realization. He woke with the weight of what he had done pressing against his chest, suffocating and undeniable. The secret burned inside him, louder than any alarm, sharper than any word his wife might say. He went through the motions of daily life, pretending nothing had changed, but every small act felt different now. Even the simplest glance toward her, the woman he had promised loyalty to, carried a sting that made him look away. He had crossed a line, and though no one else knew, he carried the evidence with every breath. The guilt was relentless. It crept in during conversations, whispering that his smile was false, that his excuses sounded rehearsed. He found himself distracted at dinner, unable to meet her eyes without remembering the betrayal she didn't yet suspect. But guilt alone wasn't the only torment. Alongside it was the craving, the memory of how alive he had felt, the way her touch had reignited something he thought he had lost forever. The contrast tore him apart. At home, he felt distance and obligation. With her, he felt passion and possibility. That duality consumed him, dragging him deeper into conflict. His marriage became a stage where he played his part, careful not to slip, careful not to reveal the truth written in the tension of his body. She noticed, of course, wives always notice. The slight changes in tone, the distracted silences, the way he seemed present but far away. Questions surfaced, small at first, innocent on the outside but edged with suspicion. He answered them with practiced ease, but inside, the panic grew. He wondered how long he could keep living like this, how long before the truth surfaced in ways he couldn't control. There were moments when he thought about confessing. In late-night solitude, he imagined laying it all bare, explaining how it happened, how he never intended to hurt her but couldn't stop himself. Yet each time, fear silenced him. He feared losing everything, the home they built, the life they shared, the identity he wore as a faithful husband. So instead of honesty, he clung to secrecy, letting the lie harden between them like a wall. But secrecy carries its own punishment. He couldn't look at her laughter without feeling like an imposter. He couldn't hold her hand without remembering the one he had already held too tightly. The weight of deception seeped into everything, staining even the smallest gestures. And in the quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. The affair wasn't just about desire. It was about the emptiness he had ignored for years, the loneliness he had buried under routines, the hunger for connection he hadn't dared to admit. That night had changed more than his marriage, it had changed him. He could never return to the man who believed in unshakable loyalty, in clear lines between right and wrong. Now he lived in the blur, in the grey space between guilt and longing. Whether he chose to continue down this path or walk away from it, the shadow of what he had done would never leave him. He carried it like a second skin, invisible to the world but impossible to shed. And so, each day began the same way, with a silent question he couldn't escape. Was the fleeting fire worth the price of betrayal? Or had he traded something irreplaceable for a night that left scars deeper than desire? The answer never came, but the question never left. Word count, 586. That completes the full 2,000-word script in 4 sections. Do you want me to now polish it into a final narration-ready version, flowing continuously without breaks, or keep it in separated sections for easy editing?